In this presentation, I'm going to be discussing how you can write essays that respond to readings effectively. By the end of the presentation, you should be able to identify the components of an essay that responds to readings. You should be able to differentiate between summary and analysis and to use techniques that ensure that you're explaining your evidence. The examples that I'm going to use in this presentation are not examples from assignments that you are going to be doing, nor are they using readings that you have read. However, despite all that, you still should be able to understand how to write effective essays that respond to readings, even though the examples are a little bit different from what you're doing. Earlier in the semester, we discussed the three parts of an academic essay. So you know there's the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. When you're writing an essay that responds to readings, each of those parts needs to have something specific. The introduction, obviously, as with all introductions for academic essay, it needs to engage readers and introduce the topic and the thesis. But when you're writing an essay that responds to readings, the introduction has to introduce those readings because that's the main point of your essay. You're going to be discussing the readings, so those need to be in your introduction. And you need to include the author's full names and the titles of the readings. And then you need to lead into your thesis sentence. And if the assignment is asking you to analyze readings or in some way to respond to readings, your thesis must indicate that. Your thesis has to refer to the readings. Each body paragraph in such an essay needs to do the usual that body paragraphs do, which is express and develop a supporting point for the thesis. But each paragraph is going to contain evidence from the readings that you're analyzing. And the conclusion, as usual, will wrap up the essay reinforcing its main point. But because in this type of essay, your main topic has been the readings, you must allude or mention the readings in your conclusion. Here's a sample introduction for a paper that analyzes a reading. Pause this slide and read it, and then we'll talk about some features of it. You'll see that it's a standard funnel type introduction. It starts with some general comments about the topic of, in this case, conformity. This was a paper about conformity and how that is shown in some readings we had. And then the introduction narrows down till eventually the author's name is given as well as the title of the story. That eventually narrows into a thesis about the story. So those are the features of an essay that responds to a reading. You have to mention the full author's name and the title of the reading, and your thesis has to allude to the reading. So as you can see in this thesis sentence, which I've put in blue, it says his story, as his story shows. So the thesis is being applied to that story specifically. Let's look at a sample body paragraph that I've taken from a student essay. Actually, I've given you the thesis and the body paragraph. And this is a problematic paragraph. So just pause the slide, read it, read my notes, and then I'll go on to explain a little bit more. One of the problems, and it's a minor one, but it still is an issue, is that the student repeated the author's full name and the full title of the reading in the topic sentence. That's unnecessary. It's redundant because that information has just been presented in the introductory paragraph, so there's no need to repeat that same information throughout the essay. The student just needed to use the author's last name, in this case Hughes, and maybe just say Hughes' story. So there's no need to repeat the same information, just refer in some way to the reading that's being discussed. But the major problem in this paragraph is that the student has just presented information. I've put it in green, just presented the information from the reading. So they've got evidence from the reading, but they haven't connected that evidence to the point of the paragraph. In other words, I, as a reader, am left to figure out how this evidence that's being presented proves the point that was expressed in the topic sentence. And at some points, I really can't understand what the relevance of the evidence is. All that's being proven here is that Hughes conforms, and then some information that's given here, I'm not really even sure why it's given. It seems like plot summary. And this is what can happen when you just present evidence from the reading without explaining the connection between that evidence and your point. One way to avoid the confusion that could occur in a paragraph like the one I just showed you is to follow this rule of thumb. Each time you present a piece of proof from the reading, whether it be a summarized detail or a quotation from the reading, precede and or follow it with an explanation of how that proof connects to the point you're making. So, if you present a quote, it needs to be followed by an explanation for how that quote connects to the point that you're making in that paragraph. The point will have been expressed in your topic sentence for that paragraph. So how does that proof that you've just presented from the reading, how does it prove the point that you expressed in the topic sentence? If you cannot provide such an explanation, then that means that piece of evidence is unnecessary. 9 times out of 10, the evidence is unnecessary if you cannot explain why it is necessary. So just keep that in mind. In a second, I'm going to show you a revised version of the paragraph we just saw. And in this revised version, the student does include such explanatory comments, and you'll see the big improvement in the paragraph. So pause this slide and read this revised paragraph. Now, do you see how much clearer the paragraph is? You see, first of all, that it's longer, it's more developed. It's not the amount of words that matters here, though. What matters is that the student has connected the evidence to the point. She's explained how the evidence is relevant to the point. So, for instance, when we were given this piece of evidence about why Hughes was crying, I was really crying because I had deceived everyone in church. Now we get the explanation for how that proves that he's obeying authority because he doesn't want to disappoint others. This admission shows something important about Hughes' personality. He hates disappointing others, which explains his tears at deceiving them. So now the student has given a reason why she has used that piece of evidence. So now it's clear to readers what the connection is of that evidence. And then this is also seen when we're given the information about the closeness of Hugh's relationship with his aunt. Initially, in that other paragraph, I was scratching my head wondering why this information was being shared with readers. What did that have to do with him not wanting to disappoint others? But here it's clear to me because the student has added an explanatory comment. It would only be natural for Hughes to want to please someone he is close with. So you see how that connects that evidence to the topic sentence? If you'll just remember that rule of thumb, every time you present a piece of evidence, Give an explanation for how it connects back to that point. That way, there's no doubt in the reader's mind why you're using that piece of evidence. Let's look at the steps to really doing a good job analyzing a reading. Well, first, obviously, you have to read closely. And sometimes this will involve reading it twice. Now, I know you have limited time, so you may not be able to read all the readings twice. But I would say if you're writing an essay about one or more of the readings, you need to read those readings at least twice. If you don't, you probably won't have a good understanding of them, because when you first read something, you're just trying to take in what's going on. Upon the second reading, you'll be much clearer, about, you'll know what's going on, and then you can, of course, go into more detail in your own mind about, why this is happening. You can raise questions, and you can just dig a little bit deeper. So upon the second reading, you can usually try to figure out what point the writer's getting at in the story. When you do figure out what you think is the point of the story, then try to find proof in the reading to support what you think is the writer's point. Sometimes when you're at step 3, if you can't find support for what you think is the writer's point, you have to go back to step 2 or even step 1, because maybe it is that your interpretation was way off. That happens, it's normal. But when you finally think you've got a good handle and plenty of proof to support what you think is the writer's point, when you start writing your essay, again, remember that rule of thumb. Every time you present a piece of evidence, you need to explain the connection between evidence and proof. Okay, this is the last one. Pause the slide, read the paragraph, and evaluate it based on what you've learned in this presentation. Does the student adequately prove the point that is expressed in the first sentence of the paragraph? Ready to see the results and see how accurate you are? Do you see how problematic this paragraph is when we look at the parts of it? In red, the student has merely summarized Milgram's experiment, just told what Milgram's experiment was about. That's not the goal of the paragraph, though, per its topic sentence. If you look at the topic sentence, what the student is supposed to be proving is that people conformed because they wanted to please others. That part is what needs to be proven. They wanted to please others. The part in red contains no information or proof for that. Then we get to the part in green. If you look at the parts that are quoted from the Prosy experiment and the Braverman experiment, nothing in there shows that people conformed because they wanted to please others. It only proves that they conformed. That's not the main thing that needs to be proven, though. It's obvious that most of the people in Milgram's experiment conformed, and that can be said in one sentence. The main thing that needs to be proven is that the reason they conformed, the desire to please others. And there is not one single piece of proof in that green part or that red part to prove that. Now we can see in the green part the student reiterated her claim. So at the bottom of that green part, the last sentence says both of these men conformed because they wanted to please the experimenter. That is merely a claim the student is making, though. She's just repeating her topic sentence in different words. She's not proving it with evidence from the reading. No matter how many times you state your claims or in how many ways you state your claim, stating a claim is not the same as proving a claim. You state your claim at the beginning of the paragraph. Then you go on to prove it with evidence from the reading. If you restate it and state it, that's not proving it. Indeed, the only piece of evidence that the student has given from Milgram's article that actually supports her topic sentence is the one in blue. There we have a very good piece of evidence from Milgram's article that proves that some of the people conformed because they wanted to please the experimenter. But that's one piece of evidence. That's not enough. I would say aim for 3. The student needs to go back to the Milgram article and find additional evidence for that point. If she cannot find but one piece of evidence, then she needs to rethink her entire point.